Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Brian Johnson, and welcome to another MassMedic webinar. I'm pleased today to be joined by our guest, Kevin Collier. He is the Vice President of RTSM, Product and Global Responsibility at Medidata, and Debbie Anderson. She's the Principal Imaging for Medidata. She's responsible for imaging, promoting education, supporting sales efforts with Medidata's CRO partners. This is the second part of our program with Medidata in a series about mitigating risks and navigating through the new landscapes of clinical trials in a time of COVID-19. Our title of our webinar today is RTSM and Remote Monitoring, Realizing Quality While Mitigating Risk. Our first webinar was held last week. We have that on demand on our YouTube channel, and we'll have the third part of this series next week. Before we begin, I would like to just do a couple of housekeeping notes. Everybody should be on mute, except for our speakers during the presentation. We will be making these slides available as well as a recording to all registrants of this webinar. We will have a prepared presentation and then it's time for quick question and answer towards the latter half of the hour. But feel free to submit questions at any time through our chat function. And we will I will moderate that discussion following the prepared presentation. So at this time, I'm going to hand over our navigation to Kevin and Debbie, and I really look forward to your thoughts. Kevin, take it away.
Great. Thanks, Brian, and good day, everyone. A big thanks to MassMedic for inviting Medidata to participate today. We're looking forward to covering our topics over the next 60 minutes. We'll start with a review of our latest updates for our RTSM solution, which are focused on supporting medical device companies and their execution of device-related trials. And my colleague Debbie will cover an exciting new enhancement for source data review. As Brian pointed out, we are recording the session and we will leave time at the end of the hour to take your questions. So, without further ado, let's get started. So again, my name is Kevin Collier. I'll be talking about our randomization and trial supply management solution today, and then Debbie Anderson will take over and discuss the source data review. We also want to take a moment to obviously address the crisis that many of us have been dealing with globally over the last few weeks and months. As you know, COVID-19 has changed the way we live and certainly has changed the way we conduct business in the clinical trial space. And very early on in this crisis, Medidata began to assess the impacts and do analysis geared around how could we continue to help our customers get the job done. And we've provided some thought leadership and some solutions that will enable you to continue to execute your research. Obviously, the global regulatory authorities and agencies have continued to issue updates on guidance and requirements to keep in mind for clinical trial conduct. And much of what we're going to talk today is focused around how these changes in guidance will impact our trial conduct. And we're keeping these four principles in mind with all of our solutions at the moment. First is patient safety. Certainly that is perhaps the most important element of what we do. We're also continuing to look at how can we maintain data integrity given the challenges that we're faced with. The completeness of data collection is certainly important, and with the fact that some trials have been interrupted or paused or even stopped, that complicates this area a bit. So we're working around that from a solution perspective. And then very related to what we're going to talk about today is the monitoring and oversight. How can we continue to execute with that given the remoteness of our trial participants and stakeholders? So COVID-19, again, has presented a number of challenges for sites and for studies, and certainly has presented challenges for patients themselves. Even pre-COVID, there were challenges around, first of all, getting patients to sign up to participate in trials, keeping them in the trials, ensuring that the data and interactions that we have with those patients were of the utmost importance and quality. And that continues to be even more of a challenge today, given the fact that many patients are very concerned about even leaving their house and going out and doing daily life types of activities, let alone participate in a trial. So in the rest of this session, we're going to highlight some of our solution areas and how they can address these challenges, as well as certainly helping to improve the efficiency and the outcomes that you achieve in your clinical studies. So let's start out by talking about the context of improving medical device trial conduct with our RAY-VDC and RTSM solution. So some of you may be familiar with RAY-VDC. Some may have even been exposed to our randomization and trial supply management solution, which we call RAY-RTSM. It is a product that is in the study conduct space. When we set out to build and implement this product almost 10 years ago, we wanted it to be completely unified with RAY-VDC. And from a transactional perspective, and you'll see this in a moment here with some example slides, we built it in a way that from a site user perspective especially, it's very simple and straightforward to use and is embedded in what they're already doing with their use of RAY-VDC. So, what's the big deal about RAY-RTSM and medical device trials, and why is Medidata recommending that companies consider using RTSM to help them execute their medical device trials? Even before COVID-19, for both drug studies and medical device trials, there were still many areas for improvement in terms of efficiencies, enhancing data quality, and then of course, all along the way, we have to make sure that we're compliant with regulatory guidance and rules and regs. And so even more so now with COVID-19, we've implemented some updates to our solution that make this more purpose fit for today's trial landscape. From the perspective of regulatory compliance, we know that we need to pay attention to how devices are used, moved around the globe, and tracking and reconciliation. And so that's certainly the first aspect of what we've implemented. As I mentioned, we're unified with RAY-VDC, and as you'll see here in just a moment, this is perhaps the most exciting part of what we've delivered, because many of these trials are already using RAY-VDC. Many of the sites are already very familiar with RAY-VDC for other aspects of what they need to do during trial conduct. And so it makes it very simple for them to add in the device element within RAY-VDC to enhance efficiencies. And certainly we have built a set of robust capabilities, knowing that today's trial landscape continues to be very complex. Studies, as we all know, change midstream quite often. So we have to have not only out of the gate a nice set of features that enable you to do the particular study design that you need to do, but also that we build in the flexibility to be able to modify any aspects of your use of those capabilities and features throughout the course of the study. So let's look at what this looks like from a workflow perspective. And again, if any of you have any experience working with drug studies, the workflow is actually quite similar in terms of the steps and the order of operations. In a device trial, it certainly starts with, we need to get those devices into the clinical supply chain for that study. And that usually starts with some sort of release process. Once they're ready, they've moved out of manufacturing, they've been QC'd and okayed to enter the supply chain. We provide the ability for study teams to release those devices into our realm. And then we can begin to move those devices around the globe as needed by creating shipment requests and moving them from the distribution depots to the investigator sites, hospitals, and other locations where they would be utilized. Certainly the most important aspect of this workflow is then getting the device associated to a subject. Whether it's a device that's going to be implanted, maybe it's some sort of monitoring element, like a blood glucose monitor that needs to be given to the subject. This is akin to doing a drug randomization and dispensing in a drug study. And so we've made this very flexible. And again, this aspect of the elements in our system design is done through RayVDC, making it easy for the sites. Now, we all know that sometimes updates need to occur to devices. Devices may need to be relocated and moved around from their originally sent location. And so we provide the ability to track and manage those types of updates, whether it's a physical move of the device or maybe an update to some software, expiry dates, lot numbers, things like that can all be managed. And then perhaps equally as important, at the end of the trial, as you start to close out, we need to reconcile the reality of how these devices were utilized and manage the reporting and closeout. I mean, this is a key part of the rules of the road for both drug studies and medical device trials, right? We have to help you as a sponsor, as a medical device company, manage the entire life cycle for the device. We do that with management of the shipments, who receives those devices in terms of the shipment, who receives those devices in terms of any implantation and disposition, and also provide ability for you to track batches, serial numbers, expiry dates. You know, all the key elements that make those devices unique are maintained in our system and can be updated in our system throughout the course of your clinical study. So the real benefit of this then is, again, it's not changing or turning upside down how you would execute a trial. It is addressing the reality that in the past, the movement of these devices, the management of these devices has been done perhaps in a inefficient, labor-intensive manner with spreadsheets and phone calls and emails and things like that being used as ways of tracking how they're used in the study. We're now automating that and bringing it into a piece of the software system, if you will, that's already being used to execute the clinical study. That is RayVDC. And RTSM is adding a few bells and whistles under the hood, so to speak, that gives you these additional capabilities with regards to association with patients and also with the documentation and reconciliation. So as you can see, and I've already alluded to this, we've created an automated workflow built on top of RayVDC. As you may know, this is all role-based in terms of the activities that we manage, who can do those types of activities. So there's no real changes to in terms of requiring new roles to be set up. We're simply adding the capabilities for certain roles to get into our system and do what they need to do, whether it's someone that's on the clinical supply side that may be tracking the movement of devices, or if it's a study manager or a CRA or monitor who needs to actually track and help with execution of transactions. Again, we are built on a platform. We have a very pervasive platform that covers the entire landscape of e-clinical technologies that are used in clinical studies, both drug and device. And one of the things that we always want to make sure that we're doing is making sure that the data is purposeful in terms of how it's being used. We also make sure that we're providing real-time ability to collect and report on that data. This is another way that we help you have useful insights, be able to react to the information that you're seeing more quickly with minimal to no delays. And then if a course correction is required mid-study, it makes it easier to identify the course correction and take that action to get everything back on track. Also, this real-time reporting and pervasive reporting capability helps you meet those regulatory requirements that we talked about in the very beginning. Again, you want to be able to quickly assemble the information should an auditor walk in the room and ask, how are your devices managed, used, and disseminated in the course of the study? And perhaps what I think is most important to remember, again, is that this is simple for sites to use. It's a single sign-on. We're adding capabilities with another solution, but we're not adding another solution, i.e. a username and password that these sites have to manage and remember. They log in to Rave EDC, and they can do everything they need to do through our login portal. It's a user interface they're already experienced with, and so they don't have to learn a new bag of tricks or a new type of system in order to get the job done. So here's an example of a maybe a typical CRF that's been built in EDC. And I really just bring this up to highlight that we can collect and manage on this form one or more item numbers or serial numbers for the devices that might be associated with the subject. Again, if this was say a surgical implantation, what's likely to happen is someone at the site's going to come into EDC after the surgery and tell us what number or numbers were used in terms of devices for that subject, and this might be a form that they would interact with to do that. And there's a lot of flexibility in terms of the questions and the data entry elements that we build into EDC, so you have a lot of flexibility there in terms of how you build this out. One of the other areas of flexibility is the reality that we can support things like data entry via barcode scanning, right? So not everyone may be using barcodes on devices or may not feel it's the right fit for their particular study or implementation. But if you are using barcodes, we can code that information into the entry so that a simple scan of the barcode would then populate this entry field. And one of the huge advantages of that then is that you perhaps make it a lot quicker for the site to get the entry done, and you're also minimizing the likelihood of some sort of data entry error. So we can apply the right quality control, again, part of enhancing data quality and minimizing queries and reconciliation downstream. I'm going to talk a little bit about the accountability enhancements that we've built into the solution. And what I mean by accountability is the reality that, again, in a device trial, just like a drug study, you have to manage and be able to document how every single device was utilized within that clinical trial. Many of those devices may have been released and never shipped anywhere. Some of those devices may have been shipped and never actually utilized or associated or given to a subject. And then certainly some of those devices are going to be utilized. Some of them, depending on the type of study, may need to be returned or refurbed. And our tool gives you the ability to manage that entire process, from documenting where those things went, any necessary comments or exceptions and queries, as well as then finally closing out the disposition of those devices, whether they're returned, destroyed, or they're going to live forever in someone's body, for example. All of that, which is again another very cool, interesting approach that we've taken here, from a site user perspective, is built into the EDC transactional interface. So again, they don't have to go into a new tool or a different functional area to manage those reconciliation steps. And then the monitor can come along and review what they've put in and agree or disagree and log the appropriate comments or closeout steps. The last thing I want to highlight here is the reality that we have certainly recognized that many companies, especially the larger medical device companies, utilize a number of different systems to manage supply chain and things like that. And so they there may be some need to exchange information either from that system into our ecosystem, or pulling and extracting data out of the Medidata platform and getting it back into that third-party tool. SAP or other ERP systems might be a good example of that. And so we do provide for support of those types of integrations. Again, this is all about not only providing as much information at your fingertips within our platform, but ensuring that we are giving you the ability to track any other data outside of the system as needed to get your job done efficiently and effectively. So again, the cornerstone of this is that our solution offers a lot of flexibility to deal with today's comprehensive and dynamic ecosystem. Yet it's built on top of our award-winning and market-leading products. So again, it's comfortable and useful for sites and study teams that have been running trials on the Medidata platform for many years. I want to come back to COVID-19 for just a moment and give you some examples of specific solution functions that we've done for RTSM with respect to COVID-19. First, I want to point out we utilize a lot of CRO partners to help manage the operations and delivery of our tools. And therefore, we've taken their feedback based on how they interact with medical device and drug companies to make sure that we're continuing to deliver best practices and most likely needed features and capabilities. And we've done that through a number of different meetings and summits over the past 2 months. The other thing is around speed and timelines. I think now more than ever, there's a lot of focus on speed to get studies up and running very quickly, especially if they're a COVID-19 study. And in just the last 3 or 4 weeks, we've implemented a number of study builds in a very short time period, on the order of less than 3 weeks. This compares to other traditional approaches that may take 3 months or more just to get those clinical technologies up and running from a study perspective. And then specific to RTSM, some other interesting capabilities that we have accelerated here is around the concept of direct to patient, dealing with decentralized trials and virtual trials, which was already being talked about a lot before COVID-19. COVID-19 gave that a kick in the pants and has really accelerated the drive within the industry to be able to truly deliver the concept of having having visits or even entire trials be executed in a remote sense, right, in a virtual or decentralized sense. And so we accelerated some plans we had for direct-to-patient shipments from August of this year, and we've moved that up to June. And in fact, it comes out this Friday evening as part of our standard release for RTSM. And this will enable clinical studies, whether they're a drug trial or a medical device trial. And obviously, it depends on the particular design whether this is applicable, but it gives you the flexibility to define patient-specific shipments, define visits that may truly occur, visits in quotes here, right, that may occur at a patient or subject's home or some other location that isn't the traditional site. And this just gives all of us more flexibility when it comes to executing trials, keeping patients in a study, and perhaps more importantly, making it easier for us to sign patients up and consent them to participate in the clinical study tomorrow. I do want to point out, obviously, we're a technology provider, as I mentioned, that has a very broad and deep set of capabilities, and we continue to innovate to move the industry forward. I've talked about a few of those examples as it relates to COVID-19, as it relates to medical device trials, and we continue to keep our finger on the pulse of what companies need in terms of their future study execution. And we do this through a number of different means: user groups, feedback sessions, obviously direct customer relations that we maintain with all of our customers. And this also leads us into becoming an established partner with you, right? Where we don't view ourselves as just building systems and software and throwing them over the fence for you to use. We want to make sure that we are staying connected to what you need and reacting to any requests that you may have. And again, our experienced professional services team spends a lot of time focused on just that. A real 365 approach to support is where we've made our name in the market today. So let's talk a little bit about how you might engage with us, or how we might engage with you in terms of utilizing our solutions, in particular Rave RTSM. We really have three different options to employ here. The first one is where Medidata is doing and delivering all of the work. What I mean by that is our team of professional experts will do the design, implementation, and configuring of both EDC and RTSM to meet your study design and your timelines. And then we will continue to provide the operational or live study management support during the course of that study. It's very hands-off for you, other than you obviously from a project management perspective will be involved in making decisions and monitoring the information that's collected. The second way is through our partner implementation program. And what I mean by that is we have over 24 CRO partners today who have been trained and accredited to build EDC and RTSM for our joint customers. And so in this case, if you're working with one of those CRO partners, perhaps for some other aspect of your study conduct, you could employ them to take on the technology aspects of this, and they can handle that for you. And then the third option, which we have a number of different sponsors that have taken this path, and that is through our sponsor enablement and implementation program. So much like the partners that have been trained and accredited, we can also train you, help you build up a team internally at your facility to do both the design and configuring of the study, and also to then manage the operations yourself. And the reality is there's a lot of options or hybrid elements to this. So again, we can work with you to do as much or as little of this as you want, depending on your comfort level, your ability to provide resources, and what have you. So in closing, before I turn it over to Debbie, I just, again, want to highlight a few of the values and benefits to using Rave EDC plus Rave RTSM on your next medical device study. We talked about the fast timelines and the ability to drive efficiencies and time savings. That's certainly important. From a risk perspective, a fully configurable product built on top of a pervasive and extensive platform reduces that risk and minimizes the challenges of a more custom build approach. Again, we've got a lot of flexibility and an extensive set of capabilities built into our tools, so we can adjust and meet the different needs from a trial complexity perspective, including the ability to, in basically real time, make adjustments to study configurations in the middle of the study, enabling you to handle protocol amendments, whether those are planned or unplanned. I talked about the data insights. Again, being part of a platform, this is very important, and enables you to have that full and deep data insight to help make decisions and make adjustments. And then again, both from the site user perspective, but also from the study team perspective, we can't understate the ease of use here, right? It's really building on top of what we already have with a single login portal, having a workflow that's very streamlined, and ensuring that data entry is purposeful and not duplicative. So with that, I'd like to now shift gears, and we'll turn it over to Debbie Anderson, who's going to talk about remote monitoring and source doc review and verification. Debbie?
All right, thanks, Kevin. So hi, everybody. This is Debbie Anderson here. I am the principal for our imaging platform here at Medidata. And I support not only our medical device customers, but also our CRO customers. So thanks for joining us today. Kevin mentioned we're going to switch gears a little bit from RTSM and talk about the topic of remote monitoring and source document review as well as verification. And really not just for today during COVID times, but also for future state or the long term. So when we look at the current landscape, we know that monitors are still not able to visit sites. There's actually a recent IQVIA report that states that about 80% of sites are still inaccessible. So in addition to that, there's been, as we know, a lot of revisions to the regulatory guidelines to accommodate this need for remote monitoring. And then we've also seen a shift just in this short time frame in the industry where we're seeing remote monitoring is actually replacing a portion of the planned on-site monitoring visits. So obviously, I mean, the biggest issue here is that site study documentation and patient source documents still need to be reviewed as part of the study conduct. And, you know, the regulations vary depending on where you are in the world. In some regions like the EU, there are very specific guidances. So it's important for us to look into those more closely on a country-by-country basis and to determine what options those particular sites have within those respective countries. And then lastly, you know, the other thing we're hearing is that sites are expressing their concerns with regards to using some sort of unsecure tool out there or just implementing some sort of process that is going to just be more burdensome for them or create more work for them. So when you're considering remote monitoring options in terms of technology, it's really important to consider the sites and the site personnel, as well as what they might be using today. And especially when they're, you know, looking at technology to get these documents to monitors so that that SDR, SDV process can be done. As I mentioned, guidances are changing, and the majority of the guidances encourage that a secure cloud-based portal be used, both for SDR and SDV, as long as the controls are in place to protect the accessibility of those documents. So today I'm going to address share some information rather regarding what we're calling Medidata's remote source review tool. And this is to support SDR and SDV remotely. So one thing I want to make sure that is clear is that this is not a new tool for Medidata. It's actually a really nicely streamlined version of what we refer to as our Rave imaging platform, which has actually been around for more than 10 years. And in fact, we are currently supporting over 800 live studies today. And these studies are not only leveraging this platform for your typical medical images like your CTs and MRIs and echoes, it's actually very regularly also leveraged for non-DICOM files, which is a document or a PDF. So if we look at the process at a very high level as indicated here, the document gets uploaded into the tool. And the tool has a really nice built-in mechanism to allow for PHI or patient health information or PII to be masked or redacted. And these workflows are going to be configurable. Your studies might vary, but generally speaking, they're configurable based on your needs so that when the document gets uploaded, it can then get distributed to the monitor or individuals that are going to be performing that SDR, SDV. And then lastly, I just want to state too that this particular platform also includes reporting so that you have operational related metrics, as well as an audit trail for every step in the workflow. So remote source review is actually just streamlining the remote source document review process. So we're providing a standardized, quick to deploy configuration And we recognize that this may not necessarily be a good fit for every single one of your studies, so it's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all, but it is going to be a very great solution for any of your studies that might have critical timelines. So the point here is that this technology is giving you guys the means for acquiring this study site documentation in a secure, compliant portal. And it can be used either standalone or it can be used in conjunction with either Medidata's CSA critical offering, and it can also be used with any EDC system. So if you're using Rave EDC, great, but if you're using some other EDC system, not a problem. Again, the remote source review tool, as I mentioned at the front end, is being leveraged today during COVID times. But what we're also hearing from customers is that they've expressed a real interest in utilizing this long term. And the reason for this is because we're really starting to see customers look at the overall costs associated with sending monitors on site, especially when you look at, fees like travel-related fees, including last-minute airfare, hotels, and meals, etc. So again, this is being utilized or planning on being utilized in the long term, not just during these COVID times. So let's dive into this process flow in a little bit more depth here. So all users are going to sign into iMedidata, and they're going to choose the remote source review link. Now, again, I said if you're using Rave EDC, great. The subjects are going to automatically come in from Rave EDC into this remote source review platform. Because the two are unified. But again, you can leverage this tool if you're using some other EDC system. So the CRC is going to upload the document into the tool. And after upload, they have the ability to redact PHI or PII with that built-in masking tool that I mentioned earlier. So then the document becomes available for the monitor, and he or she can also receive alerts so that they know immediately when that document has been uploaded and is ready to be reviewed. User permissions are also going to be configurable. So for example, perhaps you want a very strict one-to-one relationship between the site and the monitor, or perhaps maybe you want that monitor to be able to share that document with someone else to take a second look. That's configurable in terms of how we set that up. The other thing that's nice about this tool is that queries can be triggered inside of the system. So if the monitor for any reason needs that site to resubmit the document, maybe the document was uploaded and is crooked and not legible, for example. The point is that the queries are within the tool or within the system so that that monitor can ask the site to resubmit that document if necessary. Also, if you don't want the site to perform the redaction or the masking of the PHI, we can allow for the monitor to have that ability to do that step as well, or alternatively. So after the document gets reviewed, the monitor completes a quick electronic form, which basically just says, yep, I have completed this SDR process. And because this tool is a 21 CFR Part 11 compliant platform, there is an e-signature requirement in order for them to finish or complete that step in the workflow. As I mentioned previously, all the workflow is captured in an audit trail. So you know when that document was uploaded, for example, you know when the monitor accessed the document, you also know when they signed off on it and said, I'm done with this SDR process, and you have something to fall back on for audit purposes. So next up is going to be a quick 2-minute demo of the tool in action. So we're going to share a quick video with you guys.
Users can easily access the Medidata remote source review platform through iMedidata, which allows a single sign-on for users already utilizing Rave EDC. For integrated trials, subjects are automatically created within the remote source review platform. Site users will only see subjects from their own sites. Site users can quickly upload documents by navigating to the proper folder without the need to install software. Sites can also review and, if required, redact the source documents, all within the same tool. Once the upload is complete, an email notification is sent to the assigned monitor and the documents are automatically routed to them, simplifying and automating how source document receipt is tracked. Monitors can then log in and perform their monitoring activities remotely. The system has strong user permissions to allow one-to-one relationship between sites and monitors, meaning site and monitor users will only be able to see documents for sites they are assigned to. Document review and redaction can occur in one simple step, and monitors will be able to complete a simple form that documents source document quality as well as other required information for the study. If source document quality is not adequate, for example, documents are not legible, users can enter a comment within the form that will automatically send a notification to the site. Monitors can provide a 21 CFR Part 11 electronic signature to complete tasks. Real-time status reports are also available that provide visibility into all aspects of the system and can be downloaded on demand.
All right. So in terms of the remote source review platform and what you get should you decide to leverage this for future studies, first and foremost, it is something that the Medidata professional services team would build. And we are providing a very quick 2-week deployment for what we call a standard configuration. This is basically a very expedited timeline and is truly achievable because of this, what we're calling standardized offering. The other thing I'd like to mention is, in some cases we have clients that have multiple studies that are going to leverage this platform. So should you have a need to launch this particular tool on multiple studies, we would absolutely build those in parallel. So you would see efficiencies there with regards to build times. And then for training, we provide a e-learning for each type of user. So for example, there would be an e-learning for the site, an e-learning for the monitor. And then of course, you would get also the 24/7 help desk support, as well as a dedicated project manager for each of your trials. All right, so the last thing I want to just touch on is, we've seen a really massive level of interest in this remote source review tool, obviously due to the current COVID environment, but it's also being utilized across device and CROs as well as pharma clients. So, I think it's not just for these COVID trials that are quick timelines, but across the board. Again, customers are leveraging this technology today for not just those critical timeline studies, but in the long term to help as a means to reduce overall costs associated with on-site monitoring travel fees. In addition, I wanted to share, in case you missed it, on June 1st, the FDA Commissioner, Dr. Hahn, released a speech, and he said, and I wanted to just share this quote because that was very interesting. He says, quote, "To the extent that innovations and adaptations we implemented during the pandemic crisis worked and would be appropriate to implement outside of a pandemic situation, we will incorporate them into standard FDA procedures. Anything that enables quicker reviews and authorizations, we will seek to make permanent," end quote. Again, I wanted to share that just because it's really hitting home and reiterating that any new technology that has been adopted during COVID, if it's appropriate, can absolutely stay post-COVID times. And that really just goes hand in hand with what we've been hearing from our customers who are really looking to utilize this long-term as well. I mentioned this platform is not new. It's actually being used across the globe at over 19,000 sites. So especially for the device folks, it's very likely that your sites are already using the imaging platform. And if they're not already using it, they'd at least have had experience with it. And then, you know, the other thing is, like you all, our goal is also to keep these studies moving forward. You know, this tool is really going to help facilitate that process. And in addition, this is a secure platform. It's compliant, and it's reducing burden, not just on your site personnel, but your monitors as well. So they have one single technology to perform SDR and SDV in one place. So with that, I'm gonna hand it over for Q&As to Brian, and say thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for a great presentation. Debbie, quick question for you. I just want to clarify. You said 80% of clinical trials are still not in operation. Was that
Yeah, there's exactly. Yeah, there was a recent IQVIA report that said close to 80% of sites are still inaccessible. So meaning monitors can't fly out to these sites, and this SDR SDV process is in jeopardy. So
any idea and sort of at what level of functionality the industry, the sort of clinical trial stage technology is at compared to where we were pre-pandemic?
Yeah, in terms of the percentage, you mean?
Yeah, like I'm just curious in terms of how much total disruption we've seen 4 months in compared to where we were. I mean, and it can be very ballpark, but it's I mean, can we assume that, you know, of those sites, most of those have gone remote, some of them very little? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, it's hard to say, because in our conversations with our client base that are looking at options, we've heard that very rarely do sites have access to EMR systems. And because of that, everyone is scrambling to try to find a reliable, secure way to perform this SDR SDV process. Obviously, the goal, it'd be great if sites could allow for EMR access to all, but that's just not the case today. So in terms of at least what we're hearing.
So in clinical trials post-COVID, I mean, how do you both see RTSM playing a key role in the new technology needs? Will this be the new norm?
Yeah, I mean, RTSM, it's a critical function, perhaps more so on the drug study side, right, where you pretty much have 95+% of the trials require either randomization or some management of supply. Again, the reason why and we were working on this before COVID came along, the reason why we added some capabilities to RTSM to better support the medical device community and those types of studies is because we saw two real opportunities. One, increasing those efficiencies, which again, those are, you know, doing more with the same, or has always been on everyone's mind, regardless of what type of business you're in, right? How can I do more and not have to continue to spend more and more and more? So increasing those efficiencies was important to us. And delivering the control and the automation to enhance the effectiveness of running your trial, to certainly, as I mentioned, continue to be compliant with regulatory needs, but do it in a way that is more simple and more complete. That was the motivation for us doing this. And now, given where we are with COVID-19, again, we see this as perhaps a more effective way to promote the execution of trials, given that we're all working remote now, right? So study teams are continuing to work remote. And while, yeah, some sites are spinning back up and starting to get back into business, some clinical trials are starting to re-enroll and or start back up again. The reality is, and let's just go back to the 80% number that Debbie was talking about. You know, of the thousands of clinical trials in the Medidata ecosystem, the vast majority of them are still not operating as they were pre-COVID, right? And so then if you take 80% of those that are operating, they're maybe operating at a very reduced capacity. So RTSM is going to have a role in helping address this going forward.
Right. I'm curious, this one came in, are you seeing any differences in technology approaches towards medical device trials conducted within the US versus globally?
Well, with respect to RTSM, not too terribly much. I mean, there are a few regional differences in some countries like China and Japan that we have to be aware of. At the end of the day, though, most all of the global and country-based regulatory agencies have more or less aligned themselves around the same core set of guidance, right? And it goes back to those things I talked about, tracking what you're doing, who got what, how was it used, how is it reconciled or disposed of. Those high-level elements are going to apply around the globe. And again, with us having that global web-based platform, it makes it easy for teams to make use of that.
Here's another question. Do you see any challenges associated with regulatory compliance for medical device trials evolving over time as this technology evolves?
Is that for RTSM?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, again, I think as clinical trials continue to evolve, we've seen certainly a number of things. Some of this was evolving before COVID. The brunt reality that trials continue to become more complex, and even in the device realm, more and more data points are being collected. Studies are being combined that would have been done as separate studies years ago are being combined into a large Uber study today. And so our capabilities have continued to evolve to enable those types of things. And then, as I mentioned, one of the big drivers for us doing the direct-to-patient elements is I fully believe that the future of clinical trials are such that whether it's a device or a drug, you're going to see more and more remoteness to how trials are done. Obviously, you can't do a surgical implantation remotely, but if you think about all the follow-up visits that might come along with that, many, if not all of those, could be done remotely. And if it's not an implantation, if it's some sort of monitor for blood glucose or something else that you're wearing on your waist or hip or whatever, those could be shipped to a patient's home, and a set of instructions could be provided to how you implement and utilize those. And other elements such as doing telemedicine and things like that are going to enhance all companies' ability to execute studies and to make life easier for the patients.
Is there any cost-saving data that you guys have to in terms of, because the running a trial is so very expensive and very cumbersome. This any global data in terms of RTSM, what that could save if we moved studies all remote?
Yeah, so from an RTSM perspective, I think the primary area for cost savings comes down to how devices and investigative product are utilized from an efficiency perspective. So if you think about the old paradigm is I have to see the doctor's site or the hospital or what have you with a number of different items, drug or device, so they have an ample supply locally to make use of. Well, now if I start to move that to more of a point of use type of approach, and I'm shipping it directly to a patient's home, I can keep that supply back at the mother depot or the mother warehouse, right? And it's going to enable me to make better use of that product globally. And so I'm not going to need to make as much of it or provide as much of it. And that's where the real cost savings will come in, is the cost to manufacture, and to some degree the cost to distribute.
Well, great. I don't see any further questions. So if there was something we didn't ask that you'd like to say, let us know. I mean, that's always the question you ask at the end of an interview. So what didn't we ask that you wanted to touch upon?
Yeah, Debbie, you want to go first? Anything you want to add?
I was just thinking about the last question about cost for RTSM, and it made me think about some of the metrics that we've heard from a remote versus on-site monitoring standpoint. And really, I think about 30% of the total clinical trial budget is allocated for monitoring. And when you think about travel costs associated with having a monitor go out to a site multiple times, it really adds up. I mentioned earlier, there's, flights, especially if it's of that last minute necessity. I know $1,000 is a lot, but that's what costs are looking like these days for flights. And then hotel fees and food, et cetera, for multiple individuals coming out to these sites multiple times throughout the course of the trial. It really adds up. And when we looked at some of the cost savings from a on-site visit versus a remote visit, we anticipate a savings of close to $1,000 per on-site visit. So, again, this is not a one-size-fits-all, but I think it's important to really consider when your monitors can't get out to these sites, and long-term, looking at these fees overall and how it's going to impact your total study budget. Really look into those fees and evaluate monitoring tools or technologies that are out there like Medidata to help with that effort.
Great. That's a great point. Thanks, Debbie.
And
Sure.
just, Brian, just real quickly, just to add one thing, certainly costs are important, but to shift away from that for a moment, again, the remoteness of the future of doing clinical trials, whether it's monitors not going to sites or patients not coming into sites, this provides some freedom, or it frees up some time, if you will, for the study teams and the site personnel. Not that their job should go away, but I would advocate it's going to give them more time at a site level to focus on patient recruitment. At a study team level, it's going to give them more time to focus on the data quality and reviewing the information that we put at their fingertips. And in the end, that's going to result in better outcomes for clinical trials.
Great, and that's what we all want, right? Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your insights, Kevin and Debbie. You guys did a great job of presenting. It gave us a lot to think about. This will be available on demand within the next 24 hours, and we'll go ahead and send out this to everybody who registered. But on behalf of Massmedic, Medidata Solutions, and Dassault Systems, I want to thank you for joining us today. And take care, everybody.